Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Madison, Milwaukee Downtown Exchange live here from downtown Madison. And one of our panelists is also live from downtown Milwaukee. We wish we were live with you all today, but this is a third of our great partnership with our friends at Milwaukee Downtown, the bid in downtown. We are so thankful for this meeting and this connections that we're making between the two organizations and the two largest downtowns in the state. So welcome to another great meeting. We've got a fantastic panel today to discuss the future in downtowns, a big subject right now with everything that's happening federally and just everything that's happening in the world. Transportation is a major subject for everyone. So we've got a great panel here today. Want to say a huge thank you to our friends at Milwaukee Downtown who are doing amazing work. Beth Werrick, Matt Dorner, and the team, just fantastic things. So many cool things happening in Milwaukee Downtown right now. If you're in Milwaukee, go check them out. And more importantly, go spend some money in the restaurants downtown, go to a show, do something to support the downtown. They've got some great projects, art murals happening all over the place, the amazing launch of a fundraising campaign for their new dog park, which is fantastic. And just a couple weeks ago, Madison and Milwaukee shared a public art event, the Inside Out Project, part of the Jumpstart program. Fantastic, right in the center of downtown in Milwaukee and right on campus here at UW. It's great to share amazing art projects between the two. But we would not be here today if it was not for our sponsors. We want to say a few words from our great partners at Bolt. And we've got John Huggard here, the Vice President and General Manager for Bolt. John, good morning. How are you today?
Jason, I'm great. Again, thanks for the opportunity here to sponsor the Madison Milwaukee Downtown Exchange. I'm certainly happy to be here. A little bit of background on Bolt. We're a 132-year-old family managed and employee-owned organization. We're a construction company with offices, 15 offices spread throughout the United States. So I have the privilege of overseeing and leading two of those offices in our fine cities here, Milwaukee and Madison. And as a construction company, our focus is really to help meet the business needs of our partners providing construction services really in a variety of different markets, whether it's from healthcare to higher education to science and technology, continuing to automotive, food and beverage, industrial, and also energy. We believe that it's with solid partnerships that we're able to serve our clients and help build our communities. On behalf of Bolt, we'd like to thank DMI and the opportunity to sponsor this event. And I look forward to learning from the panel of experts here more on the future of transportation in our downtowns. Thank you.
John, thank you. Thank you to the team at Bolt, a statewide company doing amazing projects in both downtown Madison and downtown Milwaukee. Also, our lead sponsor here is Reinhardt, definitely a firm that works in both cities. Nathan Wadier, the co-chair of the DMI board of directors, wanted to be here, but he's in Milwaukee today. So talk about a cool story. He is at the grand opening, or not the grand opening, the getting ready, sorry, the beginning of the construction for The Trade, the new hotel across the street from the Fiserv Forum. This is an amazing project, just has Madison and Milwaukee written all over it. Obviously, the groundbreaking ceremony is in Milwaukee because the hotel is in Milwaukee, but Reinhardt and Nathan and the team have been helping all along, making sure this project comes to, and it's being developed and operated by a fantastic Madison company, the North Central Group. So really is a very cool project between Milwaukee and Madison. So thank you to Reinhardt, North Central Group for this great work and all the amazing work that the Bucks are doing in the Deer District. It's just incredible. Let's hope for more years like we had last year. Bucks in 6. All right, so we're going to start right away with our panel on the future of transportation's downtown, a big subject right now with all the federal money that's happening and what's happening after COVID. We've got a lot of things to talk about, but don't worry. We've got a fantastic panel here today to help us through. We're going to talk with the panel. We've got some set questions and kind of have a conversation, but at the end, for the last 15 to 20 minutes or so, we want to answer your questions. So if you have questions, send them in through the chat or through the Q&A function. We can find those questions and make sure to get those. So send those in at any time during it. We'll make sure to ask those at the end. All right, we've got an esteemed panel. First up, we have Ashley Booth, who's Wisconsin office leader of HNTB. Both offices here right on the square in Madison, and he's got an amazing live from Milwaukee downtown view, 20th floor view. Much better than my second floor view, although we do love our building here at Hub T at 122 West Wash. We also have Dave Steele, the Regional Transit Leadership Council Executive Director, an amazing project to bring a whole region together to discuss transportation. We are envious here in the Dane County region of the work you're doing, but you have allowed us to be part of some conversations, and we really do appreciate your collegiality there. Next up, we've got our own DMI Executive Board Member and Chair of our Transportation Committee. Sounds like a full-time job in itself, and if you ask Morgan, it may be, but a real full-time job is Executive Director of B-Cycle Worldwide, the amazing bike share program for Trek running. I mean, there are more cities throughout the country. And there's an inside joke between Morgan and I that I think that B-Cycle only goes into cities that Morgan wants to travel to because they're just amazing locations. Like, oh, let's put some bikes in Memphis or Santa Barbara. She's one smart person to do that. Last but not least, another great friend of downtown Madison, and Chris McCahill with the State Smart Transportation Initiative. He is the managing director. It's an amazing policy research think tank based out of UW and the Center on Wisconsin Studies. Chris McCahill is an expert, a PhD in the subject. We'll literally call you an expert, Chris. So we're putting the bar high here. All right, we're just going to get right into it. The first question we have is, what is the future of transportation funding, right? Funding really is, transportation is all about funding. And what is the future of the funding? What should the goals be for funding? And then I think most importantly right now, what's happening at the federal level for funding? Big topic. We are going to go around. Any one of you can answer that question to start off with. Who wants to begin? Ashley, you came off of mute, so maybe you wanted to start.
Yeah, this one is, I get paid in my day job to know this one really well, so I'll take a first stab at it. First off, I'm thrilled to be here. As Jason said, HNTB has got great locations in the heart of downtown Madison and downtown Milwaukee. And if there are any business leaders out there on this morning, I highly recommend relocating to either downtowns. It's a huge competitive advantage financially and for recruiting and retaining our talent. And we couldn't be happier than being on the square and on the heart of Wisconsin Avenue. So first off, thank you for the bids for doing this. This is a great event. Second of all, federal funding. The bad news is I don't think anything's going to happen in the next 2 weeks. I would suspect that there's going to be a continuing resolution of the federal funding and kicking the can down the road. But I think the good news is I'm hopeful that it's going to be within the next 60 to 90 days. And we're talking about an infusion of nearly $750 billion in infrastructure. And I think much to the happiness of all these panelists, a large lion's share of that is going to be going to alternative modes of transportation like complete streets and safety, grant programs for transit like East-West BRT in both Milwaukee and Madison, which is the Capital Investment Grant Program, an $8 billion infusion there. There's going to be significant monies that could go into traditional grant programs like what is now called the RAISE grant, previously Tiger and Bill grant, which helped fund the lakefront line for the Milwaukee streetcar extension. So I think the prepared worm or the prepared bird is going to get the worm here. And so Madison, Milwaukee, our local leaders, our legislators, and our DPWs and DOT have to be proactive and looking at what the program opportunities are. And we need to be getting our priorities out in front of our representatives and our legislators to maximize this once in a lifetime opportunity.
Yeah, I'll just second a lot of what Ashley just said and say, I mean, I think you already made the point, but the future of transportation funding is really uncertain, right? We see waves with different administrations and, political whims. So this really is like probably a once in a while opportunity to invest in a lot of projects. You mentioned the RAISE program. The last, which is the sort of small grants that folks can apply to for a variety of projects that wouldn't normally get funded. Under the last administration, those went to a lot of more conventional highway projects. So now, if folks are interested in funding transit and things like that, now might be the chance. And so, yeah, you're right. Whoever's ready is going to get that. Madison's BRT is one example of that. It was on the President Biden's budget, called out specifically. And that's really what it takes. So, yeah, no, don't miss any opportunities here.
Dave Morgan, any thoughts? You don't have to. It's okay. Because Dave, don't worry. The next question is coming for you, actually. So we're talking about funding, right? Regional models have been popular throughout the country, and I almost said unfortunately, but I'll just say unfortunately we have not had regional transit authorities here. We did for a few short years, about a decade or so ago, but we have not seen such since. So what do you think the future of regional transit authorities are in this state? Dave, obviously as someone that runs a regional transit organization, I would be very interested to hear your thoughts on this potential important funding mechanism and really bringing areas together.
Yep, no, that's a great question. That's the $64,000 question, isn't it? If I had a crystal ball to see how the ground might shift beneath our feet, in the state government, I'd be using that crystal ball for all kinds of things, like, hitting the lottery, next time around or whatnot. I think when we're looking at regional transit authorities, I think it's important for us to think about, RTAs are not necessarily the end all be all. RTAs can exist on paper, but have no funding. Detroit is a great example of that. And we also have some of our peer regions. When I say peer, the Milwaukee region specifically, but including Madison in that don't have RTAs and, are still, investing, here and there piecemeal in different types of projects. So, for us, our long game really is working together as a region so that one day we have a regional ask. Because I think it's abundantly clear from the action of the Joint Finance Committee this last time around, when they specifically cut transit funding to Milwaukee and Madison, that, if the city of Milwaukee kind of goes it alone and says, we want an RTA to fund these types of things, it stands a much less degree of chance of success than if it's a regional ask where Milwaukee and Waukesha and the other surrounding counties are going to Madison with that ask. And, that's a heavy lift to bring a region together around what that ask would be. But, I'm optimistic in the sense of, expanded bus service, the bus rapid transit. There's political support in Waukesha County to extend Milwaukee County's BRT out down Blue Mountain Road to the city of Waukesha. There's a lot of interest in our last mile initiative and using more on-demand types of shuttles that are, more conducive in low density suburban environments. And then the other kind of pillar of our work is making common cause with RTA groups or regional transit groups around the rest of the state. I was up via Zoom. I was up in Wausau not too long ago with the Marathon County MPO up there. Green Bay, Eau Claire, Madison, Milwaukee. We need as regions make the case in a bipartisan way that says, we need regional approaches to workforce mobility. It's critical for economic development. That's why Wausau, very conservative county board and MPO up there, is interested in the regional transportation piece because of the workforce piece. So we bring people together around what is that common thread. And at this point, that workforce connectivity piece is huge. But to answer your question directly about when an RTA is coming, I would just go, that's a tough question. Maybe Ash or some of the other, or Chris or Morgan has the crystal ball.
Someone has a crystal ball on that one. I would be amazed. Ashley, your thoughts?
Yeah, we had enabling legislation for a while, as Dave mentioned, similar to the Detroit Metro, but we didn't have funding legislation. So, enabling that legislation is first. I think, I don't want to couple the local option sales tax, and we can talk about local revenues later, but I think there's some discussions around that really can provide the communities like Madison and Milwaukee the resources to try to implement the types of infrastructure that our constituencies and employees and employers are expecting. And we need those resources to be competitive, as Morgan knows, going throughout the country. There's other competitive regions that are light years ahead of us in being able to implement the mobility infrastructure that our populations are demanding. And so, you know, we've got to figure that out collectively as regions. And I'm just call to action at this team and the people on this session to work together to figure that out. Because you're right, the crystal ball is cloudy, but I'm confident we'll figure it out. We've got a lot of smart people that care about the right things.
I like that positivity, Ashley. I think, you know, one thing that I think Dave brought up was key is some really understanding this is about workforce transportation. And I think that is a message that rings maybe more clear throughout the entire state. I think I want to back up though and ask Chris a question. Why is it so important to have regional transit, right? Let's just get to the basics of why this is important. Because why do we need regional transportation systems between two cities? Right here in Madison, our transportation system, as opposed to Milwaukee, which is a county-based, we're city-based, right? And then they have to have intercity agreements between Sun Prairie and Middleton and Fitchburg or wherever. Why is it important to have a robust regional transit system?
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously we need transit to begin with because, you know, the census numbers for Madison just came out. We grew, I think, 16% in the last decade. And that's not just in the city, you know, that's starting to spread out into neighboring cities, Sun Prairie, Middleton. And so the way we're doing that now and funding those systems and getting them to run, you know, to these outlying cities is through one-off partnerships with all of them. And sort of piecing them together. And it doesn't really give us a mechanism to all join together as a region, you know, and say, this is what we want these regional systems to be like. And beyond that, to create a way for us to say, you know, Madison needs to be connected to Milwaukee and we need to be able to fund that. So then you see things like Madison stepping in and trying to do what they can with a vehicle registration fee just to get, you know, get our transit system to where it needs to be. And that's sort of the status quo operating right now. And I don't think it's going to get us to where we really need to be to see sustainable growth in all these cities and regions.
I think it's important that you bring up those numbers, right? I mean, 16% growth here in the area, you know, what was it, 36% of the entire state's growth is happening in Dane County. And it can't just happen in Madison, right? It's going to happen in Monona and in Sun Prairie and Fitchburg and other locations. One thing I wanted to follow up on Dave's comment was about the first mile, last mile, Morgan. This is really important part because transit can only get people so far. And what are we looking at with the first mile, last mile, and the connectivity with things like B-cycle and those alternative forms of transportation? This is a really key part of the system. As a biker and a transit rider myself, this is key. And now with this new world, with COVID, you know, I think I'm a perfect example. I have a laptop and then I will work. And that means I'm going to get around to different places. I'll be a ped, I'll be a biker for a little bit, I'll be a transit. How do all those systems work well together, Morgan? And what really is that future of alternative modes of transportation?
Yeah, it's a great point, Jason. And we have seen younger generations in particular, but many people are tired of sitting in their cars, tired of paying for parking and spending their time in traffic and don't want to see that environmental impact as well. So they're looking at alternative transportation, but they want that convenience still of getting from point A to point B. And that's where that last mile, first mile connection to things like biking and walking are so critical. And especially as we contemplate things like BRT and we have fewer stops, how do we still connect people and make it really convenient and easy? Because that's critical for usage to be high. And that, you know, tying back to the regional idea, how do we make that easier across? You know, I live in Madison, but I love spending time in Middleton and Monona and a lot of those surrounding communities. So I want to have those same transportation options everywhere. And I think right now we rely on really great partnerships across cities and people who are eager to collaborate and share information. But how could we work more systematically to make that easy to take these options from one town or city into others and make it really part of a system that's cohesive and easy for people to use. Just remove barriers to people using these options and you'll see that ridership increase. And you are not unique in your experience during COVID. I think a lot of people rethought their transportation options. Their transportation needs change. So we've got a great opportunity. People who haven't been on a bike in years or ever got out and tried it during the pandemic. And how do we turn that into a transportation habit and not just a recreational fun option? So it's a huge opportunity.
Well, Morgan, I think that brings up a really good next question. Might send it right back to you and the other panelists about what does a post-COVID transportation infrastructure look like? You know, everything changed over the last year and a half. I mean, look at what we're doing right now. I mean, we're on Zoom. I didn't even know what that word was, except for from the Aretha Franklin song. But by the way, she had it 30 years ago. Imagine that. The Queen of Soul knew what she was talking about in Zoom. Half the people on this call are like, what is he talking about right now? And anyway, look it up, Aretha Franklin Zoom. What does the future, though, of transportation look like post-COVID? Because I think this is key to everything that we're talking about now.
Dave, you got that crystal ball again?
Yeah, I mean, the question is really uncertain. You know, there's a lot of talk about this big move to remote work, right? Which is going to essentially potentially change transportation patterns, but it's not clear how big of an impact that's really even going to have. You know, we still have a lot of folks working remotely, and traffic across the country is rising back up to about where it was before. And that's because I think largely when people aren't driving to work, they find other places to drive, especially when they have the freedom to do that throughout the day. So that's really unclear. We are seeing, you know, the last year or so has shown us a few things. One is how we can use space differently. So we've seen these sort of streeteries and parklet type things pop up in cities, Madison, Milwaukee, and everywhere. And I think that has really changed our perspective on how we can use space and and think differently about parking and streets. And the other thing is safety, right? I mean, we've had a pedestrian safety pandemic for a decade, and last year pedestrian deaths across the country went up 20%. So, you know, that's obviously something we're wrestling with here in Madison and trying to figure out how we can take our busy, you know, our largest, busiest streets that now have lots of development along them and make them actually safe enough for people to walk and bike and use, you know, our new transit systems and everything.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You know, when we look at the impact of the pandemic on transit and this kind of mobility around the United States, the impact in big cities was, I mean, I don't want to use the word catastrophic, but I'll use that word. I mean, Metro in Chicago saw a 91% reduction in ridership. I mean, their customer is downtown commuters, right? White collar professionals that have the option to use Zoom. I don't think you come back from that in 3 or 4 years. Now in smaller cities like Milwaukee, I mean, we saw a reduction in bus ridership of about half. So it was bad, but it wasn't that bad. And I think, you know, what that tells me is that in Milwaukee, we're serving the customer that, you know, now we have a word for it, the essential worker, right? I mean, the folks who use transit and really rely on it. Not the downtown commuter that, you know, has the choice or, you know, the rider by choice. So I think as we look forward to the future and we think about, well, if there's going to be even a 5% reduction in that sort of downtown commuter crowd, what does that mean about the service that we're providing throughout the entire day, you know, for that kind of backbone commuter who might not be traveling at peak times? And I think that's a bit of a different way of looking at transit planning in the United States. I mean, the Milwaukee's BRT, which is going to be rolling right in front of my house in Story Hill on the west side of Milwaukee. Construction is happening now. They're building the platforms, and I'm super excited. I'm walking my dog and like geeking out at these, you know, platforms on my street. But you know, the peak headways are going to be 10 minutes, which is great. But you know, I think we might have, as kind of transit advocates and planners and, you know, policy people, think about, you know, does it make sense to kind of cluster service for that downtown commuter crowd when throughout the day there's people using it to rely on it, and that has enormous ramifications for downtowns. And again, I bust out the crystal ball. The pessimist in me says, wow, 91% reduction in Metro, huge drops in New York, San Francisco. And I think, how could you ever come back from that? But then I remind myself, you know what? People have been counting out American cities for years. People wrote New York City off as dead in, 1970s. As late as the 1990s, people were writing off, all American downtowns. And yet here we are. I mean, New York City is one of the fastest growing in the United States. And, we're continuing to see tremendous growth and, in Madison and a lot of other sort of mid-tier, mid-sized cities like that over the United States and their downtown. So, I guess it depends on the day. Am I a pessimist or am I an optimist? And, how we'll, kind of come back from that.
Jason, I'll just pile on to what Chris said. I think, the one thing that it really recognized is the opportunity to repurpose our public way. And, is there a better time than now to do that? No, I mean, because there's fewer commuters, right? And so let's take this opportunity to repurpose that public way to create an environment that gives, I don't want to say pits cars against other modes, but just gives an inherent opportunity for an experience that's better for pedestrians and for cyclists and bicyclists, so that grandma can take their grandchildren to the park and go down to Cathedral Square and enjoy the great new playground that was built there, or the dog park. Obviously, it's tough to bike with your dog, but yeah, I think there's a great opportunity to
I have a few neighbors that do it every day, Ash, but yeah.
Yeah, Ash, I was going to say you need to come to Madison more often. It's a common sight to see the dog in the basket. I've seen a lot of amazing setups. This guy that I bike next to almost every day at work bikes almost full speed with this dog who's just steaming down the bike path. It's pretty cool.
I guess I have a hard time visioning. We have 2 English bulldogs and they're not that athletic. At least they are for short stints. So I think there's just a great opportunity, and HNTB's got the fortune to be working with a downtown bid in the city on revisioning the downtown plan for the next 20 years. And it's a monumental, almost generational opportunity to look at what should our public way from building face to building face look like, and how do we create that experience so that 99% of the streets aren't just for single occupancy vehicles. Let's just make 90% of the streets for single occupancy vehicles. Let's just get to 10% for other modes. And I don't think we'll see a blip on the radar on impact. So I think this is a great opportunity to just revisit that and create an experience for all users. And Morgan hit on the head. We're talking about choice. That's the beauty of America, right? The freedom of choice. And let's provide those opportunities for improved experiences for all choices.
Morgan, actually, to you, obviously Dave brought it up. The numbers are stark, right, on transit ridership during COVID. But however, the group that was still riding were the essential workers, right? They were the doctors and the nurses and the cleaners that had to do this work even in the middle of a pandemic. On the flip side, we've seen the numbers from B-Cycle, particularly with the, electrification of the bikes, has really changed the game for bike share. And so you've seen highly improved numbers over the last year, not just in Madison, but in many cities. So that is interesting. It sort of brings up Ashley's point. It is a new way to think. So what are you seeing in the bike share and just sort of pedestrian numbers and things that you're following? Because you look at these things nationwide.
Yeah, that's right. And you're spot on, Jason. Among the cities that we're in, which there are about 40 nationwide, the ones that have e-bikes saw a 62% increase in ridership on average last year. So very stark contrast to some of the trends in other transit modes. Now, I think about a couple of things that all of our speakers have already highlighted. One is safety, with maybe less car traffic, more protected spaces for people to ride. They felt safer riding a bike and were more comfortable doing that. And then the convenience piece, and electric bikes are key to that. The more real automobile replacement for a lot of people in a way that a pedal bike maybe wasn't. You can show up to your meeting, Jason, you're still in your button down in your jacket and you're not all sweaty. So that's important in making those choices really something that people feel good about and excited about, and not like, oh yeah, I should ride my bike, but make it fun. And so I think that's a little bit of what we saw with that. And but like I said, that's a huge opportunity. Same as with the public space. How do you take that behavior that started and continue it forward? How do you keep building those safe spaces, keep giving those great options so people want to choose those alternate transportation modes?
I think that also brings up a point that both Chris and Dave brought up about the use of public space. This isn't necessarily about transportation, but it is. And in Madison, we've seen this amazing streetery program take life, and we changed the paradigm about how we use public space. That in Madison, the perfect example is on Pinckney Street, where these restaurants, Lucio Merchant, Settle Down Tavern, Marigold, they've done an amazing job of taking over these 15 parking spots, which honestly, in the bid business, in the downtown management business, 2 years ago, no one wanted to get rid of parking. Now they see what the difference is to have those spots. I had a conversation with the mayor a few weeks ago and said, over my dead body, are you going to remove that amazing corridor and that open space where people are? And she just laughed and said, you think I'm going to be the mayor that's going to ask for more single occupied use parking? So I think we're good there. But let's touch base on that, because I think it's important, because you need to have destinations for people who want to go to be part of transportation. And oftentimes the transportation infrastructure interferes with those spaces. So what is the future of that sort of different use of public space? We saw it just last night on the night market in Madison, right down State Street. It was amazing. Just a few weeks ago, Milwaukee, down Wisconsin Avenue, just an unbelievable event. So how can we do more of that? And that will welcome more people in a diverse group of people to downtown.
I guess I'll take a
I
step.
guess no one wants to respond to that, Dave.
Yeah, I guess I'll break out my crystal ball here again. So, leading a regional group, it's an interesting kind of twist on this question, because I think people have a thirst and a hunger for, experiences like that. I mean, look at the Bucks run to the finals and Bucks in 6. I mean, that was a commercial, not just for the vibrancy of Milwaukee, but for public space in general. I mean, I had friends from other cities, emailing me, texting me like, wow, Milwaukee was lit. I mean, look at that. And, the more that we see that kind of thing, I mean, people want that. But, we also have to understand that for the majority of people, they also want, a free parking spot and, no traffic whatsoever. And how did the overwhelming majority of people get to the Deer District for the Bucks game? I'm going to hazard that they drove. So, we're seeing this, these kind of little communities pop up in the suburbs of Milwaukee, that have that dense walkability, but still, almost everybody drives there. So kind of breaking out of that chicken and egg dilemma, I feel like Madison has a leg up. I mean, with the university community, and, I was a student out there back in the 1990s. Everybody walked. It was a built-in kind of walkable, non-car community there. When I was a student there, graduated in the year 2000. Milwaukee didn't have that. I mean, in the 1990s, there was no walking going on in downtown Milwaukee and a lot of empty sidewalks. So I guess how we create those spaces when the car culture is just so intertwined, in our consciousness is the dilemma. I think, similar to what Morgan was saying, I mean, we just have to understand that 21st century people who grew up with cars love that convenience. And I get it. I have a car too. I didn't drive it today. I rode my bike here to Wauwatosa, but for your average person, that convenience is just absolutely killer. So how do you're never going to be able to match that perfectly, but making it as convenient and fun as possible and easy as possible is to kind of ease people into using that and keeping an eye on safety. I talk to so many people. It's like, oh, I'd love to ride my bike to work, but and then they don't even say what's holding them back. And, we know it's because of the notorious Milwaukee drivers. And I get it. I completely understand. As a 100-mile-a-week bicycle rider, I get it very much so. So yeah, I guess that's a roundabout way of saying, meet people where they're at, understand that safety and convenience are huge motivators. And maybe, we need more political leaders like your mayor in Madison that's willing to kind of put some political capital down to say, hey, no, we're not going to have continued, free parking for all. And I mean, thus far in most cities in the United States, I mean, even the big cities with great transit systems, there's a lot of reluctance to, kind of take away parking because people feel like, it's, they're just so accustomed and used to it.
I think it's a balance, Jason, right? It's always balance. I think to the restaurants that did that on Pinckney, the light bulb went off. Look, permitting it doesn't cost the same per square foot to use the right of way than it is to expand your restaurant into private building space, right? So you're growing, expanding your square footage as an entrepreneur infinitely for much lower costs. So it's a no-brainer to expand into the public right of way and leverage those opportunities. And so it's just finding that balance. There are obvious streets in downtown Milwaukee where we should be doing things like that, whether it's on Broadway in the Third Ward, whether that's rethinking Van Buren Street downtown or Water Street downtown and repurposing that. I think it's a collective balance, and that's what the professionals are for, to engage with the community and the business owners and the employers to strike that balance. But it's been unbalanced towards single occupancy vehicles for so long. And so I think just looking at transportation management, managing the parking assets that we already have, we have a ton of parking available in both communities. It's never been a problem. Now, if you have to walk a couple blocks, is that the end of the world? On top of that, can we provide fair and competitive alternatives? Look, we need more commuting bike corridors in Milwaukee. 30th Street Industrial Corridor is one that comes to my mind to tie into the Hank Aaron Trail. Madison's got some great commuter bike trails, but those are some investments we need to make as a region, as a community, to get to downtown. And then east-west BRT in both communities, and looking at north-south BRTs in both communities. You've got to provide those alternative modes to make it competitive so that you can still get the consumers and the employees downtown.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah,
Chris,
oh,
yeah, go ahead, please. Well,
I mean, I think a lot of the other points that Dave and Ashley brought up, just in terms of rethinking, especially parking, right? Like, sure, a lot of businesses are just getting some more real estate and more space, but there's businesses across the state that if you ask them to get rid of their parking lot, a couple of years ago, they would have called you crazy, and then they turned their parking lots into patios and stages and all this, and it worked, and I think it really benefited a lot of folks, and I think a lot of the neighbors nearby saw that it could work. So I think this is really going to change thinking about parking. And I mean, you see that playing out in other places, like where Madison's planning to extend BRT. Currently on either end is a mall, which is surrounded by parking. So Madison is already starting to think about how those malls might redevelop to put dense transit-oriented development right near those stations. Talking about first and last mile connections. Let's just put people right there at the stops. And then Ashley, you mentioned managing demand. Like, that's something that is really starting to be thought about more seriously here in Madison, which is, if a developer is going to come in and build a lot of parking, how is that parking going to be managed so that it's not just a free for all, there's not too much, and those developers are also making sure that they're investing in transit, giving transit passes to people if they can, building out their bike and pedestrian infrastructure, and doing all these things that they can to give people those multimodal choices instead of just handing folks parking and assuming that that's what everyone wants.
There's one thing I've learned from Chris over the years. It's about the tie-in between land use management, land use practices, and transportation, right? I mean, it's just so important. We talked about public space sort of used as entertainment and public space options, but you can also turn that same space into bike corridors and transit corridors and things like that. And we saw that under COVID, right? With Olin Park and a few other examples here in Madison. And some of them I don't think will ever return. It sounds like near Olin Park, that's what's going to happen forever. And so I think there's been some real positive change. All right, so we've got one more question for the panel, but so we've got time for questions from you all in the audience. So if you've got questions, send them in through the Q&A or in through the chat, and I will ask those questions. But the last question we have here is a big one, a controversial one. What about the connectedness between the two cities, Madison and Milwaukee, right? We've got these two amazing downtowns. We've got great density in both cities, but they're both smaller cities compared to other similar states. Like, let's take Minnesota, for example, where 58% of the entire population of Minnesota lives in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area. 29% live in Milwaukee, and 12, it's probably higher now after the census numbers, probably 13, 14, 15% of the state population now lives in Madison. So how can we combine those two together to create 40 or 50% of the population and that density and the innovation that happens? But we need to be connected. How do we better connect the two cities in transportation?
I'll start and maybe give people a little bit of time to think, but you know, we shouldn't overlook that we missed a big chance, right? We had a big opportunity to connect the region with high-speed rail, and you know, talking about once in a lifetime opportunities, you know, we missed that opportunity. So you know, we're gonna have to think more creatively about seizing whatever opportunities come along, whether it's federal funding again, or you know, really thinking how to pull this off as regions and states, and you know, like our mayor in Madison did, really sort of throw some money into it, if that's possible, and make, you know, connecting the regions a real thing.
I really love this question because this is my life. You know, I mentioned that I went to school in Madison in the 90s, and my personal and professional connections to Madison are huge. And, you know, I live in Milwaukee, but I'm in Madison literally 2 to 3 times a month, mainly for, you know, family reasons. So I feel like I live my entire life on the Madison Milwaukee nexus. Spent a lot of time in Johnson Creek and Lake Mills, and you know, these other communities kind of in between. I usually drive there. I occasionally take the Badger bus, and I have ridden my bike between the two cities. So, you know, when I think of what assets do we currently have, right? I mean, I think there's a tremendous underutilized asset, and that's the Badger bus. I mean, it's a fantastic service. The Wi-Fi is great. And, you know, it gets you downtown to downtown in a pretty decent amount of time. It's a little slower than driving the car, but, you know, it's just like 2 or 3 stops along the way. It's a pretty good service. But, you know, that needs to be expanded. I mean, I've talked to people that live in Milwaukee, work in Madison, and, you know, ask, so have you ever considered the Badger bus? And it's like, yeah, but I would, but the frequency is just not there. Especially during the evening commute. If you know, have to leave out of work at 5 o'clock and you miss that one at 5:15, I mean, I'm just making that up. I don't have the schedule in front of me. You're kind of out of luck until 7 o'clock, and then you got to call your spouse and say, I won't be home till like 9 o'clock. You know, and I think that's one of those assets that, you know, it is designed around the student crowd. I mean, when I ride the Badger bus, I'm the oldest person on there by far. I mean, I'm old enough to be most folks' dads, you know, and they're looking at me like, who's this old dude on a laptop? But, you know, I wouldn't give short shrift to the existing things like the intercity bus connections. But they need help, they need support, they need you know, more attractive places where they stop. They need, I mean, back in the day in the 90s, Badger bus had a depot on West Wash. That's now gone. Now it just kind of drops you off there on the street. You know, the stop in Milwaukee is a little bit more, you know, built up at the intermodal station there, connects to the Milwaukee streetcar and the bus system. So just with careful planning and expansion of the routes, I think, you know, those types of things can work. And, you know, and honestly, I think that if those assets are maximized, that helps make the case for rail much stronger for a lot of people that, you know, are a little bit more on the fence about it, or, oh, I don't see the benefit of it. I think there's a perception, and I get this in working regionally and talking with people all over the Milwaukee region, including out in the suburbs, that trains are kind of bougie. You know, they're there for, you know, people that, you know, might be a white collar professional. And then the natural response is, well, you know, those people all have cars, why wouldn't they just drive them, right? And, you know, I think if we can point to a really robust intercity coach service like the Badger bus, and, you know, lots of people using it, then that shows, hey, there's crazy demand here for this. So, you know, I would just encourage us to think about that. But, you know, to Chris's point, we got to take every opportunity that we have, and we do have some great opportunities coming up. So let's think creatively about how we, you know, make those happen.
I know we're short on time, but I'm hopeful. You know, Chris mentioned we had an opportunity. This current, what was approved at the Senate includes $36 billion for Amtrak. Now, $24 billion of that is going to go to the Northeast Corridor to connect Boston to DC better. But there's $12 billion of opportunity there that somebody's going to invest into a regional passenger rail. And so are we going to be at the table, or are we going to continue to let our federal funding go to other states? And so I think there's an opportunity potentially here to look at that. And I would argue that there's already demand. I don't think there's a demand convincing challenge. You look at the latent demand that occurred when Amtrak and DOT opened the airport station at General Mitchell. It did not take away from the ridership at the intermodal station in downtown. It actually captured a larger audience of suburbanites. So I think there's definitely a demand in the western suburbs, and to connect our western suburbs and Watertown to downtown Milwaukee and downtown Madison, and then the end-to-end connection. And let's not forget, it's about connecting Madison to Milwaukee to the, I don't even know, 100,000 pound elephant in the room of Chicago, right? And so that's really what it's about. It's not about just connecting Madison to Milwaukee. It's connecting Madison to Chicago, and the energy and the growth of economics and job opportunities in the Madison market, and connecting that. Milwaukee would benefit hugely from that. We're in the middle of that mix, right? So I think it's a no-brainer. We just have to be prepared and position ourselves to strike while the iron's hot.
I couldn't agree more, Ashley. And I think I would actually add, maybe I'm a homer because I'm from Minneapolis, but you put in Minneapolis, Milwaukee, Madison, Chicago. I mean, talk about an amazing economic arc of power there. And if you have the interconnectedness between those 3 or 4 communities, excuse me, it could be quite powerful. And like the connections, why are they putting all this money into the Northeast corridor? Because those big infrastructure cities are there. All of a sudden, you can see this arc of these 4 cities with their power and their connectedness. Morgan, we had a conversation just a few days ago about where potential Amtrak station could be here in Madison. And as you know, Chicago to St. Paul is the second route has already been approved, and they're working on that now. And I think it comes in 2024, 2025, which will really, really help. Got lots of questions here, though, from the audience. First question, how can a focus on workforce transportation as a selling point to get various communities on board be a long-term solution, given what we've seen in the disruption to transit due to COVID? There are other life needs that transit can serve that are resistant to these market disruptions and that have historically not served transit off-hour schedules like weekends. Big question.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in on that one. I think, let's see here. Yeah. Oh, it went away. That's fine.
That's my bad, friend. I'll put it back up.
That's fine. I remember it. So, yeah. So, we were talking earlier, I think Dave mentioned the changing transit patterns that we've seen with, the peak period seems to have leveled off, at least for now. And we see travel spread out throughout the day. So, Madison, coincidentally, is redesigning its bus system right now. We've hired a consultant to rethink, especially with BRT coming, how the buses could flow better around that system. And one of the questions we're going to have to wrestle with as a community is, are we more interested in serving those high ridership peak period flows, or are we more interested in making sure that everyone has some level of coverage throughout the city? And that question could really shift, what the essence of transit is here, and maybe move us towards a system where folks can count on more reliable system throughout the day, including late at night. If you're going downtown or if you're a late night worker. So there's definitely an opportunity to serve folks in that way. And the only thing I also would add is, we still are just beginning to see a shift in thinking about transit as a way to attract workers and residents, right? Like I mentioned earlier, parking is often like the big sell that an employer can offer to its employees. And in downtown Madison, the university, city and state employees, transit and B-cycle are a big part of the attraction. And I think some employers are just starting to learn that and think about things in that way.
Absolutely, Chris. And your point about the other options that are part of it start to serve those other needs in communities. If you can't have a bus running at every hour, how are you offering complementary alternative transportation options like biking to fill in? And how are you making those meet the needs of those riders, not assuming that what we're doing today is what they need? Do you have, bike share stations in the right locations to connect them to their neighborhoods or whatever it is? So really thinking more broadly from where we are today and really understanding what the needs are.
Yeah, I would just go back to what.
Sorry, Dave, please
Sorry.
go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just go back to what Ashley said very wisely about balance, right? I mean, transit is set up to move large numbers of people from point A to point B during specific time slots. And, we live complicated lives now, where most of us have come to rely on that kind of spontaneity of a car. So how do we kind of fill in those gaps? Looking north of the border to Canada, there's this town outside of Toronto that gave Uber passes to all residents. I mean, that was their transit system. They experimented with basically Uber for all, which is a very attractive concept for a lot of mayors, especially elected officials in the suburban areas that I've talked to. Well, Uber and Lyft, and the challenge with that is that's exorbitantly expensive. You run out of drivers, and what they have found out up in Canada was, because it was so popular, they ran out of drivers to actually drive the vehicles, and the prices like skyrocketed. And people were like, well, what the heck? I thought this was our, they're really polite being Canadian, but they were like, what happened? I thought this was our transit system, right? So, but I think, there are creative uses of those types of services, bike share, scooters, let's find ways like they're doing now in Europe to put all of it to live here on your phone where, Siri, I need to get from point A to point B. Well, here's an Uber that can take you to a bike or a bike share that can take you to a transit hub to then connect you to your destination, maybe all with one fare. Things that are accessible and easy for people to use and convenient for people to use. And I really appreciate that question, Montavious, because it's workforce is kind of our hook in talking about transit to non-transit type people. But the majority of people aren't really using it to go to work. And we need to, they're using it to go to the store and to the library and doctor's appointments, yes, and to work and to see family. Understanding that flexibility and where we need to go is huge.
And I know I'm not a panelist, but maybe I play one right now. I think we also have to remember workforce. What is workforce, and when are they working? I think that's highly important. I came from hospitality. I managed hotel in Milwaukee and in Madison, and they don't work traditional hours. Hospitals, these places don't work traditional hours. I think we're going to see more of that, and we have to have the transit options. I remember we'd have staff at the Hotel Red or the Iron Horse who'd have to leave at 11, 12, 1 in the morning. They honestly, the only option for them was an Uber, and they all of a sudden gave up an hour worth of their pay to do this. That's not an equation that works. That disproportionately affects people of color and many other things. And so we absolutely have to do that as well. We got one last quick question here. I think a really important question, not just about moving people, but moving freight, right? Another important aspect of transportation are the huge impacts on our business on freight, rail, and trucking. How are we in a position in Wisconsin to see goods and services move throughout the state?
Well, I think that's going to be a huge challenge in the future. You look at the trends in how we consume or order our goods and services, right, relative to merchandise. And so obviously freight rail is the biggest bang for the buck. I think Wisconsin's on the cutting edge there on investing in our freight system. And obviously you've got a large volume. I think our biggest challenge is just how many localized regional trucks do we have running around our neighborhoods, right? That's a quality of life challenge that we're facing. I know I don't enjoy it when I do get the opportunity to work from home and I'm in my beautiful backyard in Brewers Hill and I hear these giant, massive trucks ripping through my neighborhood at 40 miles an hour, dropping off Amazon boxes. So, I think it goes right back to that balance discussion, right? We've got to figure it out as a society, how to meet the demands of the consumers and balance being able to move goods and services. So investment in our interstate highway system has to continue. Investment in our freight system has to continue, but being sensitive to how that impacts our neighborhoods and communities obviously has to be a change in our approach that was not part of the discussion for the last 60 years of of investment in those things. So I think that's changing, obviously, as we see that dialogue play out on I-94 East-West here in Southeast Wisconsin.
And on the micro side of that, instead of having those big trucks going through your neighborhood, how do you think about cargo delivery options? So you see FedEx and others investing in cargo bikes for that local delivery to complement their other methods. So I think that's a really interesting and evolving area. And how do we think about how they fit on bike paths? And so many other questions that brings up, but definitely important to be thinking about.
All right, we have 3 minutes left. So that means each of you get 1 sentence to answer this question. You're welcome for this. What does the future of transportation look like in our 2 big cities in 1 sentence each? I'm going to call on Chris first. He's an academic, so he's got to have an answer quick, right, Chris?
And so you want me to turn into 1 sentence?
True. Less than a book.
No, I mean, this is maybe a cliche, but for both cities, it's really about growing up and not growing out, I think is going to be the key, right? We've spread out a lot, and we need to figure out how to keep that growth contained.
All right, Morgan, we'll pick on the Madisonians because I know them better.
Thanks, Jason. I think it's safe, it's convenient, and it's focused on the community and the community environmental impacts, et cetera.
Awesome. Dave. Oh, you're on mute, which maybe you want to.
That's my sentence. Sure. I'm on mute. Yeah. No, both cities have downtowns that are equitable, they're inclusive, they're reflective and embracing of the diversity of their surrounding cities and regions. And they're engines of opportunity for all, not just in Madison, Milwaukee, but really people throughout the state.
These are really good. We should use these, by the way. We're recording this, so we will use these. Ashley, you get the last word.
I'll even simplify it. I'll cut my sentence to 3 words. TOD, transit-oriented development. Chris already called on it on East-West and the ideas on how to rethink our suburban shopping malls. Milwaukee just had a great example. 333 Heinz project just announced, got approval at Z&D this week, $140 million tower. And one of the key drivers is they're on the streetcar route. So can you imagine if we extend the streetcar beyond 2 miles, how many more projects will be attracted to being on it? So transit-oriented development is a way to do a lot of the things that we want to see in our community. Is gonna drive a lot of that what we want to see.
Awesome. Ashley, that's a great last word. To Chris, to Dave, to Morgan, to Ashley, thank you for joining us for this very informative panel today. Thank you again to our friends at Milwaukee Downtown, Beth Werrick, Matt Dorner, Gabriel, the team. You guys are amazing, great partners. We have another session, the last of our year of our quarterly events. It's going to be Thinking Big about downtown. So please do join us later this year. I think it's in November. We will send out more information. Also, thanks to our friends at Reinhardt and Bolt for making this happen. And thank you to all of you for joining us this morning. This session is recorded, so please send it out to your friends when it's done. Hope everyone has a great weekend, and I hope I see you all in a downtown soon with the shopping bag in your hand or just finishing a meal, because that's how we can support our downtowns and support the transit infrastructures that we need in both of our cities. So thank you again to Chris, to Ashley, to Morgan, and Dave for this great conversation. Thank you all. Hope you have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye now.
Thank you.